Is not all the world like this? Gazing at this transfigured desert, I remember the games of my childhood. The dark and golden park peopled with gods. The limitless kingdom we made of this square mile, never thoroughly explored, never thoroughly charted. We created a secret civilization where footfalls had a meaning and things a savor known in no other world. But when we grow to be men and live under other laws, what remains of that park filled with the shadows of childhood? Magical, freezing, burning. What do we learn when we return to it and with a sort of despair marvel that within a space so small we should have founded a kingdom that had seemed to us infinite?
In 1927, Antoine De Saint-Exupery, the French writer and pilot, was working for the Latécoère airline company. His job was to carry mail over North Africa on the Casablanca-Dakar route, an area destined to be of profound importance both in his life and in his writings. These were pioneer days, when few men could see the point of risking their lives carrying a sack full of letters a little faster to their destination. In a book that he wrote for children, The Little Prince, he recalls one of his forced landings in the desert.
I slept that night on the sand 1,000 miles from any human habitation, so you can imagine my amazement at sunrise when I was awakened by an odd little voice. "If you please, draw me a sheep." "But what are you doing here?" In reply, he repeated very slowly, "If you please, draw me a sheep."
So Saint-Exupery met the Little Prince. His kingdom was a distant planet called Asteroid B162. Here he ruled over 3 volcanoes, a few flowers, and the dangerous baobab plants, which, if they were not uprooted quickly, the possibilities were too terrible to consider. That is why the young prince wanted a sheep to eat the baobabs as soon as they appeared. But he had something else, a flower, a rose that was like no other rose.
"A sheep, if it eats baobabs, does it eat flowers too?" "A sheep," I answered, "eats anything it finds in its reach." "Even flowers that have thorns?" "Yes, even flowers that have thorns." "Then the thorns, what use are they?" "I don't know." At that moment I was trying to unscrew a bolt that had got stuck in my engine. Don't you see, I'm very busy with matters of consequence. He stared at me thunderstruck. "Matters of consequence? You talk like the grown-ups. Is it not a matter of consequence to try and understand why the flowers go to so much trouble to grow thorns that are never of any use to them? Is the warfare between the sheep and the flowers not important? And if I know I myself one flower which is unique in the world, which grows nowhere but on my planet, but which one sheep can destroy in a single bite some morning without even noticing what he's doing, oh, you think that that is not important?" The night had fallen. I let my tools drop from my hand. "The flower you love is not in danger because I will draw a muzzle for your sheep. I did not know what to say to him. It is such a secret place, the land of tears."
Like the hero of his own story, the young Saint-Exupery never quite seemed to belong to this earth, but to have dropped on it by chance from some other planet. But for all this, he still dominated his brother and sisters. In their large chateau in Provence, they lived a secure, happy childhood. When he was 4, his father died, and from then on he was always his mother's favorite. He made enormous demands on her, as in all his personal relationships. But even as a child, he was demanding of himself, too, what was later to become a persistent yearning for something beyond what he called the tyranny of petty things. He once constructed some wings for his bicycle and could not accept they wouldn't work. "You'll see, one day I'll fly, and crowds of people will shout, 'Bravo, Antoine De Saint-Exupery.'" As some men embraced the discipline of the monastery, so Saint-Exupery followed the hard and often hazardous profession of the pilot. Flying for him was to be a revelationary experience. "If only," he once said, "we could let go of our shallow reality to grasp a great shadow." Released from the earth, he was like a bird, liberated, free. It was a sort of escape into ecstasy. The Latécoère Airline Company was known throughout the world simply as The Line. Its international fame was based on the spirit of total devotion it inspired among its staff. The delivery of the mail was a sacred mission. Its administrator was Didier Dorin, who was to serve as the inspiration for the autocratic, ruthless and dedicated Rivière in Saint-Exupéry's novel Night Flight, a poem in prose that carried the reader into the new and magical world of flight.
Evening was rising like a tawny smoke, and already the valleys were brimming over with it. The villages were lighting up, constellations that greeted each other across the dusk. The earth grew spangled with light signals as each house lit its star, searching the vastness of the night as a lighthouse sweeps the sea. Every place that sheltered human life was sparkling. It rejoiced him to enter into this one night with measured slowness, as into an anchorage.
Free from the conventions of his native France, his ideas began to take shape. Here among the colour and contrasts of another world. Before becoming a pilot, Saint-Exupery had tried a number of jobs. With most of them he was unsuccessful, and all of them he disliked. By experience, he found that he was ill-fitted for a sedentary career. By nature, he was a nomad.
Old bureaucrat, my comrade, it is not you who are to blame. No one ever helped you to escape. You rolled yourself into a ball in your genteel security, in routine, in the stifling conventions of provincial life, raising a rampart against the winds and the tides and the stars. You have chosen not to be perturbed by great problems, having enough trouble to forget your own fate as a man.
All his life he was tempted to conceive man cast in an heroic mould, only to discover that it was a conception far beyond most men's aspirations. He was essentially a humanist.
I said to myself, this is the child Mozart. This is a life full of promise. Princes in legends are not so different from this. Protected, sheltered, cultivated. What could this child not become?
One thing that always haunted him was his fear of being a mere spectator of life. He desperately needed to participate, but often it was as if a whole secret world was eluding him.
What can one know of a girl who passes, walking with slow steps homeward, eyes lowered, smiling to herself, filled with adorable inventions and fables? Out of the thoughts, the voice, the silences of a lover, she can form an empire. Thereafter she sees in all the world but him a people of barbarians. More surely than if she were on another planet, I feel her to be locked up in her language, in her secret, in her habits, in the singing echoes of her memory. Born yesterday of the volcanoes, of green swords, of the brine of the sea, she walks here already half divine. Marrakesh. I stand by a fountain. Women come up to draw water. Of their drama, I shall know nothing but these gestures of housewives. A child, his head against a wall, weeps in silence. There will remain of him in my memory only a beautiful child, forever inconsolable. I am a stranger. Man in the presence of man is as solitary as in the face of a wide winter sky, in which there sweeps, never to be tamed, a flight of trumpeting geese.
But beyond the cities and the barrier of the mountains lay the desert. Cap Juby was a refueling station in the Rio de Oro. After serving his apprenticeship as a pilot, Saint-Exupery was put in charge of this remote outpost.
The love of the Sahara, like love itself, is born of a face perceived and never really seen. Men will die for a calcined, leafless, stony mountain. The nomads will defend to the death their great store of sand as if it were a treasure of gold dust. And we, strangers though we were, we too loved the desert, to the point of feeling it was here we had lived the best years of our lives. Everywhere there is silence. There is the silence of peace, when the tribes are reconciled, when the evening once more brings its coolness. There is the silence of noon, when the sun suspends all thought and movement. There is a false silence, when the north wind has dropped and the insects announce the eastern storm, carrier of sand. There is a silence of intrigue when one knows that a distant tribe is brooding. There is a tense silence when the messenger is slow to return. A melancholic silence when you remember those you love. could not tell what visions were vanishing in the dying slave, what Senegalese plantations or white Moroccan towns. It was impossible for me to know whether there was merely a world of petty cares, the tea to be brewed, the camels watered, or whether the hard bone of his skull was in a sense an old treasure chest.
The simple and hard life of the desert, the exacting discipline of the line. For Saint-Exupery, these were the critical years of his life. In spite of his notorious absent-mindedness, he was a resourceful and brave pilot. At Cap Juby, he'd also shown himself a born diplomat in a politically difficult post. As the company's activities expanded, he was transferred to Buenos Aires. At this time, the risks involved were enormous, and so were the casualties. It required brave men like Jean Mermoz, whose love of flying was equalled only by his love of life. There was the quiet and modest Henri Guillemet, of whom Saint-Exupery said, "He exudes confidence the way a lamp gives off light." After he crashed high up in the Andes, he walked without food for 6 days through the snow, not knowing if there was help within 500 miles. What he said when rescued reflects that quality Saint-Exupery discovered in his comrades of the line. What matters is to take a step, then another step. It's always the same step, but you have to take it. It was in South America that he also met his wife, Consuelo. It was hardly a conventional marriage, but then neither of them were conventional people. His greatest fear was what he called a bourgeois marriage. When life became too settled, he did his best, unconsciously and instinctively, to stir up trouble. But then the rose that the little prince loved so much also had her thorns.
"Flowers are so inconsistent," said the little prince. "I ought to have guessed all the affection that lay behind her poor little stratagems, but I was too young to know how to love her."
From South America, Saint-Exupery returned to Paris. Married to a beautiful and fascinating woman, lionized in French literary circles, his career seemed established. But the Paris of his student days, so full of promise, had changed. With maturity came the sense of time passing.
I know the mood. 3 years in the desert taught it me. Something in one's heart takes fright, not at the thought of growing old, not at feeling one's youth used up, but at the thought that far away the whole world is aging. The trees have brought forth their fruit, bloomed in their loveliness. But the season is advancing and still one cannot leave. But the season is advancing, and other men will glean the harvest.
His depression was chiefly caused by the line going into liquidation. Flying had given him a sense of involvement in life, which alone allowed him to write. In debt, he entered a competition to fly from Paris to Saigon and crashed in the Libyan desert. He and his companion walked for 3 days with only a flask of coffee between them. In Europe, fascism was gaining ground. It was the complete contradiction of all Saint-Exupery's beliefs. As a journalist with the Republicans in Spain, he was to experience the terrible absurdities of civil war.
It is the savor of bread broken with comrades that makes us accept the values of war. But such a war as this is won by him who rots last, and in the end, both rot together.
After the Spanish War, and until his death, he was to produce the bulk of his literary work.
The desert is beautiful, said the little prince, and what makes it beautiful is that somewhere it hides a well.
In The Wisdom of the Sands, a book that was never finished and only published after his death, he again uses the images of the Sahara to describe his concept of an ideal society.
The well was so deep it could reflect but a single star, and when the slime had caked, the trapped star died out. Thus the lack of a single star can overwhelm, as surely as an ambush, a caravan upon its way. Think you a caravan makes haste? Let 20 centuries roll by, and then come back and see. It is my purpose to lay well the foundations of my citadel, for here I have halted the progress of my caravan, which was as a seed born in the wind's lap. It is a citadel to which a man may draw near and from which he may retreat. And her I cherish who is able to build her life around the inner courtyard. Her I protect, who does not love the spring in its diversity, but one flower in which all springtime is incarnate. A woman not in love with love, but with that one form which love has made her own. And this woman has but to depart, and everything is changed. Of what use then is the flute on the wall if it no longer makes melody for her? Of what good is your ewer of pure silver if it no longer serves the rite of drinking tea together, preceding the hour of love? He was full of years, and the light of words had grown dim for him. Yet he was becoming ever more luminous, apter for the task for which he had made the barter of himself. With trembling hands he continued perfecting his work, which had become for him an elixir ever subtler and more potent. Escaping by a miracle from his gnarled old flesh, he was growing ever happier, more and more invulnerable, and dying knew it not, his hands being full of stars. You, sentinel, when you keep watch, are in communion with the whole city made over to the starry night. Not with that dying man's lament, nor those cries of a woman in travail, nor the whispering of lovers, nor the whimpers of a newborn babe, but with the whole city. Your ear is pressed to the bosom of her you love, and these sounds are the beating of her heart.
In 1939, the sentinels of France were totally unprepared to withstand the Nazi attack. Saint-Exupery was beyond the official age for combat flying, but with his usual persistence, he bullied his influential friends.
If I don't get into this fighting, I'll have a breakdown. I have a lot to say about what's happening in this war, and I can say it only as a combatant, not as an onlooker.
He got his way and joined the French Air Force. The outcome was one of the outstanding novels of the Second World War, Flight to Arras.
War is that thing in which clocks are no longer wound up, in which beats are no longer gathered in which farm carts are no longer greased.
France fell, and he went to New York. But again, through entreating his friends, he was soon recrossing the Atlantic, this time with the American Air Force in North Africa.
I've just had a few flights in a P-38. It's a fine machine. I would have been happier to have had it when I was 20. But I acknowledge with gloom today, at the age of 43, I can't find much pleasure in the game. It's more so as not to escape any of the cares and vexations of my generation than of finding satisfaction in the past.
It was the feeling that he was played out which led to the theory that he committed suicide. At the time, a friend asked him why he was always drawing a child and butterflies.
Because it's an idea that pleases me, to chase after a dream that can be realized.
But now the dream seemed always more elusive. His squadron was moved to Corsica, where Saint-Exupery lived in a small chalet at Bastia.
Dear old friend, I feel at the end of my tether tonight. It's sad, for I so want to love life a bit, but I don't like it at all.
He'd already done 8 reconnaissance flights. As he prepared for the 9th, he knew it was perhaps his last. In a few days, he was to be grounded. The morning of July the 31st, 1944 was bright and clear. He took off at 8:30. His destination, Annecy, a town not far from his childhood home. He never returned. Nobody knew what happened, except on that day a German intelligence officer recorded that a P-38 Lightning had been shot down in flames over the Mediterranean Sea.
This, for me, is the most beautiful and saddest landscape in the world. It is here that the little prince appeared on Earth and disappeared. Look at it carefully, so you'll be sure to recognize it in case you travel someday to the African desert. And if you should come upon this spot, please don't hurry on. Wait for a time, exactly under the star. Then, if a boy appears who laughs, who has golden hair, and who refuses to answer questions, you will know who he is. If this should happen, send me word that he has come back.